For example, suppose you believe your firm should have a AA credit rating per S&P. There are other credit rating firms such as Moody's, such as Fitch. Their designations are a little bit different, but it's pretty much similar. For example, what we call AA, I think what S&P calls AA, I think Moody's calls it BAA, something like that. I don't remember the exact correspondence. You can look it up. It just basically means almost perfect, but not close enough. If you want to think in terms of individual credit scores, you know, AAA would be 800 plus, AA would be maybe 775 to 800. This is kind of a rough correspondence. There are publicly available indices maintained, first established by Merrill Lynch. Now it's called Bank of America. Why? Because back in 2008, when Merrill Lynch collapsed, Bank of America bought Merrill Lynch for $2 a share. At the height in 2007, Merrill Lynch shares were trading over $400. So that $2 was only to kind of satisfy the then Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson. They basically bought it for free. I mean, most of brokerage is still done through Merrill Lynch, the so-called thundering herd. And we have publicly available daily data on these, on FRED, which is short for Federal Reserve Economic Data, St. Louis. I don't know how you pronounce that in Kentucky. How do you guys pronounce St. Louis in Kentucky? St. Louis? St. Louis. But you say Louisville. Oh, I'm sorry, Louisville. It's funny stuff. First year I came here back in 2003, I had to go somewhere in Versailles. And this was before GPS and all sorts of stuff. I mean, I look at the map, but I couldn't figure out. I stopped somewhere at a gas station. I asked the guy, "Can you tell me how can I get to this street in Versailles?" He's looking at me, "What?" And I said, "Versailles." He said, "Show me." I showed him. He said, "Oh, you mean Versailles?" "No, I mean Versailles." And there's Athens. They call it Athens in Kentucky. It's Athens in Georgia. The same spelling. Of course, I had similar issues in Boston. There's a little beach town north of Boston. It's called Gloucester. But, you know, I asked for direction. This is in 1980s. I asked, how can I go to Gloucester? I said, what? Same thing with Worcester. In England, you call it Worcester. In New England, you call it Worcester. We will look at the so-called option adjusted spread, there are good reasons to look at it. Suppose the firm has a lot of bonds, but there's not much liquidity. Okay, some of it is 5 years, some of it 10 years, some of it 7 years. The index itself is for the overall rate, but there's a mix of maturities in that index. The option adjusted spread is an index of the difference between the yield of the corporate bond and the yield of the treasury bond with similar maturities. The reason we say option adjusted, because many corporate bonds have built-in options such as callable bonds and convertible bonds. So you can't simply say the bond is trading at 105% and let's figure out the yield to maturity. If a bond is callable, that means outside of an initial call protected period, typically about a year, the issuer has the right to call the bonds back. And right now the interest rates are high, right? Even treasuries, 5-year treasuries, let me actually see where they are right now. CNBC. 5-year treasuries are at 3.7%. Okay. But so if you're kind of a AA firm, that means roughly you're going to have to pay somewhere around 5%. If 1 year from now the rates have gone down, either A, overall rates have gone down, or your credit quality has improved, you can simply say, instead of paying 5% for another 4 years, I can call the bonds back, reissue them at a lower rate. That means that has value for the firm. So that's going to make the bonds trade at a lower value than they would have had otherwise. Because if I'm buyer of one of those bonds, they're going to call my bonds back at precisely the wrong time. Suppose it's a bond that had a 10% yield, and suddenly there was a significant drop in rates, let's say at 6%. Then they're going to call my bonds back. I'm going to have to reinvest them at 6%. I don't like that. So I demand a discount for that. But these option adjusted spreads basically estimate the value of those options. How to do that is a graduate level finance course. I don't even try that in my derivatives class because it's really technical. It's not complicated, but there's a lot of partial differential equation solution in there. So we're not going to go in there, even in the derivatives class. But there are methods to estimate what those are. So, for example, if you go to Fred, maybe later, see how the markets are doing. I guess it's going to be flat until the Fed decision today. Okay. I bought some natural gas stuff. That's why I was looking at that. Fred.stlouisfed.org. This is a huge database, by the way, in terms of economic data. If you ever need historical data, on a lot of economic stuff, you can get it here. There is even data here on the share of top 1% in wealth over time. If you want to see, of the total wealth, this is in United States, 31.9% is held by the top 1%. That number used to be only 23.6 back in 80s. There's even data on top 0.1%. These are basically the billionaires. That's 12 and a half. I mean, US has a population of 330 million, I'm sorry. That means 1/8 of the entire wealth in the United States is held by 330,000 people. On the other hand, look at the 50th percentile. Bottom 50. Only 3.3% of the entire wealth is held by 165 million people. But it's been going up, at least. This is right after the crash in 2008. Now it's up by significantly. Of course, most of that happened after, you know what happened in that quarter. COVID, you know, the stimulus and other payments. So that thing is going to come down again. All right, what we were looking for. Option adjusted spread, double A, option adjusted spread. So that's in percentage points. So it says if you have a credit rating of double A, on average, you would have to pay 0.87% above the corresponding treasuries. So if you're going to issue a current double A average, OIS is 87 basis points, or BPS. Remember, a basis point is percent of a percent. So it's 1 in 1,000. 10,000, I'm sorry. Current 5-year treasuries,